So we'll start by quickly revising what we studied in the last lecture. All laptops off, please, except for the TS. So in the last lecture, we discussed some definition of an API. Can someone remind me the definition of an API? What is an API? Okay, second row, what is an API? Anyone? What is an API? Yes. Okay, so it's a way you are trying to access data from a server. More generally, what is an API? You're trying to access some resource, and you can think of this as an interface towards that resource. In the bank example, we don't directly get access to the money. We have to go through the bank teller or the manager. Similarly, for trying to access some data, we don't directly get access to the database, but we get access via an API. And through that API, we can access the data, we can add some data, we can delete some data. So there are only certain kinds of operations which you are allowed, and that also depends on the access level that you have, the control and the rate at which they provide such mechanisms. So we said with respect to HTTP, once we make a request, there are different status codes associated with the response that you can get. In most cases, we would like to get the status code 200, which means that the request went okay. 500 was the case when the request failed, but this was due to some issue with the server. It was nothing to do with your end. We also looked at that there are few different formats, and we also looked at some of them in the lab yesterday. So JSON, XML, CSV, HTML, and protobuf. So we said that JSON is readable. It is the common interchange format, common message format, inspired by the JavaScript object or the Python dictionary. So it can be nested hierarchical structure. XMLs are similar, but you have to have a start tag and an end tag. So this is perhaps something in JSON. This is the equivalent in XML. You have to have a start and an end tag. So it gets a bit verbose. CSV is comma separated values. So it's the most common format if you have tabular-like data structures. In CSV, can you store some hierarchical data? For example, if you also wanted to store with respect to the fresh red apple, you wanted to store something else. Perhaps the amount of redness, or the age of the fruit, or something which is only specific to that fruit. Could you do that? You could, but it would need you to, so you could either remove the hierarchy, which would increase the number of rows, or you could not use CSV and use something which is a nested tree structure. HTML typically used to create websites, but we can still store some data there. Parsing would be a little hard, and we'll see how to parse the data. Now, this is where we stopped last time. So we also discussed this question. What happens when a browser, you put a URL on the browser? How do you get the response? Who does what? There are several aspects, there are several steps in this process, but we don't need to look at each and every step. For now, just think of the browser as a client which makes a get post set of requests on your behalf, gets the response, and then nicely renders that response. But can we also do that on the command line? Why might we want to make some get put request on the command line? If the browser exists, why might you prefer to use a Python client or a command line terminal? Sorry? Faster responses.
If you're making an application, you wouldn't instruct your application to go to a browser. You would directly give it a Python.
Yeah, so the browsers are meant for humans, whereas when you want to create APIs, whether you want to do some automatic processing, you want to make things more automated, you want to make things quicker, batch things, you can use command line tools, you can use programming. Wherever you want a human to look at it, of course, the browser is the tool to use. So we will be first looking at, we'll be looking at two such tools to access URLs or to make get and post requests. One would be in Python, the other would be in just command line, which is known as client URL or curl. Now, we also briefly discussed about this tool and how to think about such tools. So, I will also be honest that I don't remember each and every option with respect to this tool. So, the way I think about this is to always write the manual. So, open up the manual, read through it. They will sometimes have some examples which we can then use. Last time I also showed this demo kit which I had created. So, we can make get, put, request, post, request, etc. And I had also put this option to copy as curl, Python request, JavaScript fetch or HTTPI. So, if you wanted to make a get request on / hello, you would just copy in this from here, and let's just paste this here. So, it is saying that I want to make a get request with the flag X on this URL, and I've specified in the header that the content type is application /JSON. And this is the response that I get. It is a JSON. So, it's think of, again, those who still have not picked up what is JSON, think of this as a Python dictionary as of now. It's not exactly same, but think of it that way. So, we saw this tool. We could also have got multiple items. I think we saw this last time. We can also invoke this interesting greet API. So, let's say that if we wanted to greet question mark name equal to student. So, whatever is the name, whatever is passed as the name equal to will be in the response. So, you will receive student, you will receive that response. Now, there are other flags also. So, if you want to see the response headers, so the flag is -i or -i, whichever way you want to say. So, we now see the response headers. The status code is 200, which means it has succeeded. The date, content type, content length, the server, the other things such as the link, xquery, vary. Again, all of these we don't need at this point. This is to just show you that you can also similarly learn these tools, invoke these for your specific applications. Sometimes you also want, how many times do you, when you're trying to do write some program, you face some errors? Have you then heard someone who's more experienced than you? Can you tell me exactly what happened? Can you give me more details? Can you give me more logs? Have you heard of such terms? So, one such way to do that is all of these very nicely created programs have a mode called verbosity. So, think of verbose meaning a lot of details. That's the literal meaning of verbose. This is what ChatGPT sometimes gives you. So, it becomes very verbose. It also gives the option. Do you want the response to be the persona? Do you want the response to be very verbose? Do you want it to be very succinct? Do you want it to be balanced? If we put this verbose mode on, now you will see all the details. So, it says that the TLS connections are being made. So, once you study subjects such as computer networks, you will understand what these means. What is an SSL connection, the certificate which are needed for HTTPS requests, HTTP version which you are using 1 or 2, the host, etc. So, you can see incoming and outgoing traffic both. So, greater than symbol what you send and less than symbol which means what you have received. Like we have sent that get me hello with this host for this user agent with the content type this, and this is what I have received. The response is 200. This gives you a very good sense of what you are sending, what you are receiving. Eventually, this will also help you understand how we can build tools such as this, what is sent, what is received. Now, if you want to make a post request, this is also something which we saw last time. I am doing a quick recap. So, get will get you the data, post is typically when you want to create something. So, we want to create a new item laptop price 9999 quantity 5, and if we send this, we'll have now more items created. So importantly in this, you have to add the data again in JSON, typically in some JSON-like format. So you have to then specify, if you were to copy this as curl, you can again copy this as curl and see now the format, the request has changed from get to a post to this URL. The header remains the same, application JSON, and the data that you're passing is something like this. Now, if you have to create 20,000 items, can you now do it very efficiently using the command line? If you had to instead use the browser, what would you do? Go to a contact form or an upload form, add the details there, get some response. So there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of very slow user interface involved. So does this give you any idea? What could you automate? How could you use these to make your life easier, to make things more efficient? That is something which I want to hear from you. What do you think? Beyond the tools, so the tools we'll teach, how do you intend to use these? Where do you envision you could make a post request to make your life simpler? Anyone? Debugging. What do you want to debug? Okay. Yeah. So this was the flavor of the apps which we were making in 2010s and 15s and so on. People would, the typical stack would be called a LAMP stack. LAMP stack, XAMPP stack. Has anyone heard of these terms? No? So it used to be Apache, MySQL, PHP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. This would be the stack you'd create web apps. Then you'd have a web app where someone would put their details and then some processing would happen. And then if you had to do the testing, sometimes you'd do the testing via manually entering the details in the form and seeing whether it is entered into the database or not, whether the field validation is happening or not. But you could automate this. This is one such application. Good. You could also upload files, which would make things interesting. I'd leave this for now. So you have to again specify F flag that it's a multi-part form data for file upload. You can upload the files. So again, think of this as, could you be using similar kind of an API to send email to your friends with attachments? You'd have to somehow figure out that Gmail gives you an API where you'll have to log in, you'll have to upload a file, you'll have to make a put request, post request, something like that, and then you get back a response, whether the message was sent or not. Okay, so we also use APIs in different ways. So do you know that we use a script to send individual students marks? Like in different courses that we teach, we typically send you emails. Do you think we copy paste each person's marks and then we send it? That would be very inefficient. That would be 350 students, 350 emails. So we can again have something equivalent of this. Not exactly this, but something equivalent of this. So it has to be an API which helps us to make requests to send out emails with certain content, which is parameterized by the specific user email and the content. Now, once we have looked at curl, you would very much appreciate the next library, which is Python request, because we are much more used to Python as compared to using command line. So it's a similar kind of a library. Let me show this in action. So we wanted to make a GET request first, and I'll copy this as Python request. Okay. So does this look like a very simplified version of what we were doing earlier? We are importing a library called request. We have a URL. We specify the headers, which is now a dictionary, Python dictionary for us, which is convenient. The content type is application JSON. Response is request.get. So it's a get method that we are calling, invoking with the URL and with the headers. The response status code that we get is 200. The response that we get, so this is the response that we get. It's an object, so it's a Python object, but we can get different fields. So response.content is an example. Response dot. So I'm using autocomplete here. I don't know how many of you use this in the age of LLMs, etc. If you open up any good IDE or on IPython like interfaces, you do dot and then do a tab, you get all the possible options. This is one way in which I have learned a lot. So I keep trying out different fields and see what content exists. So response.headers, response dot maybe JSON. So it's a method. Let me call a method. This gives me the JSON-ified version of the response. I can again do response dot raw. Okay. Okay, so it's a URL lib object, which is the base library on which these different libraries are built. We can get the response.text. So the response we're getting in text format. So depending on the kind of response that we have, we can use these different options, getting the response as a JSON and then sending it to further. So if I wanted to get the message, how do you think I'll get now? I wanted to see what message was being passed. What do you think this is? So do you remember the type? The type keyword in Python? It is a Python dictionary. How do you access a value from a Python dictionary? Response.json, and you give the key. The key is the message. You get the value. So this is how you can build these tools. So based on these tools only, in fact, this entire application is being built. So actually think of this application as a wonderful use case of everything you learn in this course. One, so let's brainstorm. Let me hear from you. What do you think are the technologies involved in this specific website or this app that we have created? What all technologies are we using which are pertinent to this course? I'll give the hint. First one, we are talking about HTTP. What are the others? Where is this app hosted? Hugging Face. So we want to be talking about deploying apps. That's one. How is this app created? Fast API, which I mentioned last time. So that's an interface or a library for creating such API endpoints. That would be another. I am also using another important thing called Docker here to create the environment. So I can actually just go here and show you. I'm using something known as a Docker file. These will learn these things in this course. So that's another thing we have learned. What do you think this is indicating? Does this look like a GitHub repo? Because it is. It's not a GitHub repo. It's a Git repo hosted on Hugging Face, which is similar to GitHub, another interface for storing Git applications. So we'll also learn about version control. So therefore, in this app itself, we can see multiple of such important aspects of the course being deployed and overall being created. Perhaps the most exciting bit about this app, which is also relevant to this course in 2026, is that this was vibe coded. Whether you want to call it vibe coded, agentic coded, etc. But it's working out well because I think with good experience, you can make good apps. With bad, so one quotation I've been hearing about, something I've been reading about is that with newbies who don't really know programming, for them LLM is, can you do the thinking for me? What do you think about experienced people? So newbies might say that this is the assignment, this is the question, please give me the entire thing. I have a deadline. How do you think experienced people might make use of such tools? Okay. So I'll tell you some ways in which, at least for this specific application which I created, I thought that this is my initial specifications. I want to show these different interfaces, get, post, request. I want to create a user interface broadly looking something like this in very simplified language. Then I asked, please ask me relevant questions, do an interview so that we can do back and forth and create a much more sophisticated specification files. That was one. Second, I told that these are the set of tools and frameworks which I think would be relevant, but again, please tell me the pros and cons and we can discuss and then finally choose. Like Fast API, I suggested perhaps Fast API and Hugging Face, etc. But again, I said that let's do the pros and cons. I told let's create some test cases. Let's create a version control. Let's also create some functional testing so that we can test out some application. Let's create some Docker files so that the environment is reproducible. And then if you do this 2, 3, 4 times in the iteration, you'd be able to get a much better response as opposed to, so if you're using it as a pair programmer or whether you're using it as an typing assistant, you'll get much more leverage as opposed to this is my question for the assignment, just please complete it for me. You'll not learn anything. Coming back, so let's look at another example with request. So the basic loop in request is to import request, give a URL. If needed, give the headers. Sometimes you don't need to specify the headers. Do request.get or request.post. When you do request.get, you may specify the headers, may not specify the headers. When you do request.post, what do you need to give? You need to give the data. Right? In get, you don't have any data. In post, you have a data. So you may, again, let's say that I don't know anything about this. So I do post. I did autocomplete. I'll do a question mark, press enter. It shows me the documentation for that method. Or I can also do a help on so it gives me the help function. Importantly, parameter data. You have to specify the parameter, the JSON serializable object. So they give a lot of flexibility. Now, for this post request, creating an item, we have seen on the curl what we had to do. In Python, it will be perhaps easier. So because it's a Python dictionary now, as opposed to a JSON object that you have to create. So URL headers, everything till this point is the same. The only new thing which you are specifying is the data, which is a JSON object you are passing. Now the status code that you got is 201. You have to figure out what 201 is. Leave that as a homework. The JSON that you've created is message is this, item is this, so on and so forth. So now this opens up a lot of automation for you. If you similarly open the OMDB API, you try and get the data, you'll get a list of such movies. You can now iterate through them because now you're in the Python world. The curl world, I would still say, is a little difficult for us because we've not so much used to programming there, but this is in our land. Any question till now? Importantly, so this will happen when you do this in a more practical scenario. Whenever you make any request, you also have to handle for some connection failures and some errors which happen. Like you can have timeout error, you can have some HTTP error. So you'll have to ideally write a function like this. Okay, so few practices which we should always follow is to always save the raw response because always from the raw response you can extract out anything, as opposed to if you just saved a JSON, you can perhaps not go back. You want to be logging everything as much as possible because if you have more logs, you can reduce them to filter out whatever you need. You sometimes want to use checkpoints. Does anyone know what a checkpoint means? What is a checkpoint? Git commit is one very specific version of checkpoint.
Like or you could just save a copy of it on your computer. Something you could revert back to.
Okay. Okay, good. Any other definition of a checkpoint?
You save your progress up to that point so that if it crashes, you don't have to start over from the beginning.
Yeah. So in certain games, if you have played, I don't know, think of this as if you have cleared a particular round, do you go back to round 0? In Super Mario, for example. If you are on world 4-1 and there the dragon kills you, do you go back to world 1-1 or do you start with 4-1? So it's a checkpoint. Similarly, we want to have checkpoints for the data, for the app, etc., so that we start off from where we stopped. So if we do a very quick comparison between curl and Python, we'll want to use it much more for the automation cases, and because of the utility of because it's inbuilt in Python, so you can use in the other code in Python also. Okay, now we want to come to the next part. Thus far, we were talking about the cases when the data was available through APIs. What if the data is not available? What could we do? What would be scenarios in which the data is not available?
When you're working on a very niche problem, the data just hasn't been collected ever.
So let's go to IMDb website. Let's maybe search first for this. Okay. Let's say I want to get this rating. It's mentioned here. Again, should I take a screenshot or should I just open each and every web page and get something? You could do that very slow. Before that, maybe this is hidden somewhere in the API request. So let's see what is happening. A lot of requests are being made. If you go in some detail, you will be able to see when I type Swades, there is a Swades.something being opened. You can actually see that. But importantly, you will not be able to see this specific rating which they have, which means that they are not directly exposing an API endpoint for you to get the ratings, which would have made your life simpler. What could I now do? What do you see on the screen? Is it some kind of a rendering of some data? So the data actually is, if you just go to the view page source, it's a HTML page with, can you see something interesting here? Name is Swades, description, successful Indian scientist returns to an Indian village, etc. Where is it mentioned? A successful Indian scientist returns to it. So some content with the name is mentioned here, the Hindi drama musical. So let's see if we can find Hindi drama musical. So we can find out each of these things. Can we also see this 8.2? So the content is there. Now the question is, how do you figure out this content? And can we do this programmatically? How would you do this? By? Yeah, you'll have to figure out where in this HTML is it occurring and where in the structure is it occurring. So for now, I will do a little bit of cheating. Again, this is shown purely for educational purposes, assuming you'll be using it only in good faith. Let's inspect this element. I think this movie should have been rated Meta. It's now 9.2. Again, only in good faith. Don't do this. But I can inspect and I can figure out that this data is stored somewhere in span class equal to SC4D, C495, C11, LB, QR, CRY. Now, if it is stored everywhere in this, can you think of this problem as a string matching problem? Or a search? In Python, you know how to search something in something. So you know how to search. You know how to search this, or you also know, is this correct? Is this how we use? Yeah, so you know how to search. Now you can go from 9th to the 11th place and you can figure out the actual data. You could do that. So this is what this effectively will boil down to now, the computational problem. Given an HTML structure which is very complicated, how many of you have written HTML from scratch? What does the field meta do? Anyone? How do you make a web page responsive? What is the responsive web page? This is how the page looks like on a phone. So it fits in nicely, therefore it's a responsive web page. There is something you have to do to make it responsive, whether the same page can work for a tablet, for a phone, for a big laptop, etc. Oh, that was not a part of the course, but this was just to check how quickly you can respond to and whether you have thought about such things or not. Highly emphasize, think about such things. So the question, how do you do the search? To do the search, we need to understand that we will be scraping the data. So scraping means basically searching the data in this mess of data in the HTMLs. We don't have an API, or I should rather remove this. API is too expensive. I don't think that's a valid reason. Importantly, many websites don't want to be scraped. They explicitly have something known as robots.txt. They have sometimes very clear terms of service which prohibit from looking this up. If such things exist, again, you have to draw the line and not use them wrongly. Yes?
Sometimes even when you open up inspect element, many of these elements are hidden, right? So could you like open up some Wikipedia page and run inspect element from it?
Okay.
Because when I have tried it, I cannot see all of these paragraphs in it.
Okay. What should I now inspect?
The page.
No, any specific thing you want me to inspect?
Can you run it on? Yeah. Oh, you can see it.
You need to have good luck. No, his question is very valid. I don't know how many of you understood the question. Sometimes you don't see something in the source. Why is that? Even though you see it in the HTML. How could that happen?
It's relayed from some database.
Sometimes the content is dynamically generated. So it is not a static website, so the content comes from somewhere else. So it's typically a JavaScript which will run, which will generate that. How do you scrape those content? We will look at maybe in the middle of the course. So there we will have agents which will mimic the Python browser behavior. Those who want to try it out right now, you can use one of these tools, three tools, Mechanize, Selenium or Puppeteer. So you can use these and figure out whatever I've said. But again, coming back in the interest of time, this is what a typical very minimal HTML might look like. So it will show the title, it will show something. So this particular kind of a structure is known as a DOM. Does anyone know what does DOM stand for? I am forgetting. Document Object Model. Okay, yeah, Document Object Model is correct. So can you see that this is a nested structure which would be like a tree. So HTML has a head and a body. HTML is opening, HTML is closing. Within that, you see the opening tag head, head. and body and then body. Body opening, body closing. So within the HTML tag, you have head and you have the body. Within the head, you only have the title. Within the head, you have a title open, title close. Within the body, you have this div, which is getting closed here. Then you have a H2, which is getting closed here. You have a span, which is getting closed here. P, paragraph, which is getting closed here. So HTML has body, which has div, movie, which has title, span, year, p plot, and this is the data in there. So if we understand this structure, we can then parse through and get much more information. Laptops off, please. You can look it up mechanized later if you're looking at that. Okay. So this structure makes it somewhat practical for us to find some terms. Now again, there are a lot of details to how the HTML works and what is a div, what is a CSS, what is an anchor. I will not teach these things. I will leave this as an exercise for all of you to figure out. We don't need all of those details also. For now, think of this as a tag-driven language where you have to have an open tag and a closed tag and then something in between. For certain tags, you are also specifying certain properties like class equal to. So first, let's look at a sample website which we have created for this course. For some reason, github.io pages render very slowly, at least for me. Is that your experience also?
These days, yes.
Okay, I can do another thing also. This is. Okay, I have this locally also. So I can just preview it here. So this is a very simple website which we have created specifically for this course, which just has a movie library and a set of movies with some rating. So think of this as a very minified version of IMDb website that we have. You can look at the entire source code, which is also, by the way, having meta tag. So figure out what that does. So we have specified some style files also, which we'll skip for now. You have a head, then you have a body. Body is a header. You saw this content, my movie library, then a paragraph. And then you have this navigation bar containing home, movies, about. Then for each movie, you have these details: inception, year, tags, then the rating, etc. So we want to somehow from this extract some data. So the first thing which I want to show you now, this is another tool which we have created for this course. We will visualize the DOM tree. While it is opening, let me just go to the slide. So I'll now be using a tool called Beautiful Soup 4 and request which we were using previously. Now I want to somehow extract all the HTML contents from any specific page, and then I will invoke a specific tag if I want to search for something specific. So maybe I can just copy all of this. Okay, I did not import. Let me see if I have the code here ready. Okay, so this DOM tree is open. Overall, I have HTML. Then I have the head and the body. I have perhaps in the head, I don't have anything meaningful for the data. Then in the body, I have the header, where I have the H field and the para field, and then I have the div container. Then I have the movie grid, and then I can see a list of 8 movies. So if I open up this one, and perhaps if I copy this code which I have created, so now see that I make this URL request, I pass it to Beautiful Soup, I tell it to figure out the div.container, then movie grid in that, and then movie card in it. So is that what we had? You have a div.container, container. So dot means the class with container. Then inside that movie grid, then inside that movie card. And once you do that, you will be able to get that specific element. So that is what Beautiful Soup will do. It will help you walk through this nested structure to identify the specific elements which you want to access. At this point, once we get back the response, which is perhaps again delayed because of just the GitHub loading, we should be able to, I wonder if we can also just give the local URL. I'll try that in a bit. So yeah, we could also just give it this way. I think that will be easier. So this is the HTML that we had passed, assuming it. Now if you want to search for the title, so I want to search here. Right? So I would give something like title equal to soup.find h2 header 2, and the class name is title. Then I'll get this specific row, and then you can also do title.text. Right? So this is, if you expand on this, you should be able to get even from the IMDb website or some other similar website, you should be able to get the movie name, movie rating, etc., everything which is present on there, if they follow the same structure. What could be some downside of this approach? Of scraping the data. Sorry? Credibility, okay. So very often, let's say if you are IMDb, you want to add some new feature. If you add some new feature, will the HTML change? If the HTML changes, does your parser break? So we have to be a little wary of that if we use such kind of methods. So overall, by looking at several of these tools and in the lab in the assignment, eventually we'll be able to create a database such as this, where we can use DevTools to figure out the APIs, we can use curl to test the request, and then Python request to automate the data, and where needed, we'll use Beautiful Soup for scraping. So I'll skip some of these. Eventually, you want to be storing the data in some CSV or some JSON format, which we'll use going forward. Eventually, the data set might end up looking like this, which we'll be using for ML modeling, which is what I think all of you want to do. We just get rid of the data. Let me quickly get to the actual subject which I want to learn, which is machine learning. But I have a surprise for you. That does not still work out. So which is the topic we'll discuss now, data validation and quality. Just give me a minute.